What if the quiet man you dismissed was carrying more grief around his neck than most people carry in a lifetime? Los Angeles International Airport throbbed with motion, departure boards flickering, wheels clicking against polished floors, voices rising and dissolving into the vaulted terminal. Amid that engineered chaos moved one man, a disruption not through noise, but through stillness. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't on his phone. He didn't wear anything that tried to impress. Just a dark leather jacket, aged and cracked like it had stories it never got to tell. Faded black jeans, scuffed boots, and a silver crucifix around his neck. The chain hung heavy and low, swaying slightly with each step. The pendant was thick, worn, engraved so faintly you'd miss it if you weren't really looking. Sage. Most people weren't looking. To them, he was just another older man with a tired gait and a 1,000-yard stare. But for those who noticed, really noticed, there was a silence about him that pulled the air tight. Not celebrity, something older than that. Graver. Robert Downey Jr. didn't walk like someone trying to make a flight. He walked like someone who had nothing left to prove. When he reached the first-class lane, he stepped in without hesitation, measured and calm. Only a couple stood ahead, murmuring over boarding passes. He waited, one hand resting over the crucifix like it was more than metal, more than memory. Like it was guidance. The flight attendant at the gate, Carla, mid-40s and crisp as starched linen, ran her post like a control tower. Her blazer looked sculpted. Her bun didn't dare a strand out of place. She processed passengers with speed and precision until she looked up and saw him. Something in her faltered. The jacket, the crucifix, the eyes. There was no arrogance in them, but there was gravity. Her fingers hesitated over the boarding pass scanner. Instinct nudged her to ask questions, even though protocol screamed routine. Sir, she said, her voice steady but narrowing. This lane is for first class only. He didn't argue, didn't posture, just held out his pass. She took it, glancing down. Name, Robert Downey Jr. The kind of name you didn't need a second look to register, but she did glance again. Not at the letters, but at him. This wasn't the man from red carpets and witty interviews. This man looked older, weathered, not aged, dimmed, not dull, real. You're in the right place, she said, almost too quickly, handing the pass back with a hint of apology. He nodded, slow and almost imperceptible, and moved past her without a word. But Carla kept watching, a knot forming under her practiced smile. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, the silence he brought or the weight of that cross. He didn't wear it like faith. He wore it like memory. And in that brief, sterile moment, something older than the terminal stirred. She didn't know yet, but this wouldn't be just another flight. Not for her, not for him, and definitely not for whatever story hung from that chain. The first-class cabin whispered comfort, warm lighting, champagne already fizzing in crystal, seats that promised sleep and solitude. Downey eased himself into 2A, deliberate and careful. Not because he was tired, but because stillness had become a form of respect. For the past, for the weight he carried, for the time he no longer rushed. The seat accepted him with a creak of leather. The overhead bin shut with a muted metallic sigh. He pulled the seatbelt across, then adjusted the collar of his jacket. The crucifix slipped free, resting on his chest. Heavy, silver, battle-worn. Not decorative, not performative. At its center, faint but permanent, Sage. The name wasn't just etched, it was embedded like a scar. Carla, now back in the galley, should have been checking supplies. Instead, she found herself glancing down the aisle again. He hadn't moved. The cross caught the light every few seconds, glinting like a lighthouse in calm water. She didn't understand why it unsettled her. Maybe because first class wasn't built for reminders. It was built for erasure, for control, perfection, curated indulgence. And here sat a man who brought his ghost in with him, quietly, unapologetically. Carla blinked and straightened. She dealt with her share of celebrities, demanding, shiny, theatrical. But this wasn't that. This was something else. This man didn't need attention. He commanded space by what he chose not to say. And in that silence, there was something unnervingly honest. She stepped into the aisle, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer as though tightening the boundaries of her role. Her eyes slid toward Downey. He hadn't moved since boarding. His head was slightly inclined toward the window, eyes half closed. Not in sleep, but in something closer to presence. Complete, weighted presence. It unsettled her. He didn't emanate charisma or seek approval. There was no signal of performance. That crucifix around his neck, no sparkle, no declaration, hung there with the gravity of something that wasn't meant to be seen, but felt. Heavy in the way sorrow lingers. Quiet, inescapable. She slowed for a moment. Something stirred beneath the surface, a vague flicker of memory. A cross in her father's palm, held like it still had a pulse. She blinked, pushed the thought back where it came from. There was work to do, composure to maintain. She turned, but couldn't help glancing once more over her shoulder. The cross hadn't moved, neither had he, and somehow that felt worse. The cabin door sealed behind her with its hydraulic hiss. Outside, the sun bowed toward dusk. Inside, something quieter began to rise. Not fear, not yet. Just atmosphere. Tension unspoken, but undeniable. The aircraft had taken off minutes ago. Engines settled into their steady hum, casting the cabin in that strange mid-air limbo between ground and destination. Downey sat perfectly still, hands balanced on the armrests, his posture firm yet absent of rigidity. He hadn't watched the safety demo, hadn't glanced through the window once. His gaze remained forward, almost meditative, like he was watching a film only he could see. The crucifix rested on his chest, glinting gently as the ambient cabin light shifted. Not arranged for attention, not obscured either. It existed there as if it had always existed. Like the weight of it helped anchor him to the present. From the galley, Carla found her eyes drifting again. Routine, she told herself. Just monitoring. But every sweep of her gaze kept dragging her back to him, to the glint of that cross. She'd seen religious symbols before, countless times. But there was something about this one that didn't play by the same rules. It wasn't folded politely under a collar, wasn't camouflaged by designer fabric. It was unapologetic, honest, in its own way confrontational. She took a breath and approached, heels hushed against carpet, shoulders squared, smile engaged, voice tuned for civility. "Excuse me, Mr. Downey," she said softly but clearly, pausing by his seat. He turned slowly to face her, calm, composed. His eyes were a shade between steel and dusk, unreadable, not defensive, just present, waiting. "We've been encouraging passengers," she began carefully, "to keep personal symbols, particularly religious ones, more discreet, especially in our premium cabins." He didn't react. No twitch, no narrowing of the eyes. Just a stillness that asked her to continue. "It's not an official policy," she added quickly, "but it helps maintain a more neutral environment. Some guests may feel uncomfortable," he finished for her. His voice was even, grounded, not amused, not angry, just tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She nodded slightly. "Exactly. We simply encourage discretion. Perhaps it could be tucked inside your shirt." She gestured vaguely, suggesting without commanding. Embarrassment wrapped in etiquette. Downey looked down at the crucifix, then back at her. His voice, when it came again, was quieter, lower, as though unearthing something buried. "This stays out. No escalation, no challenge, just fact." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I understand it may carry significance." "It's not just significance," he interrupted, voice dropping another register. "It's memory." His hand rose to the cross, tapping it lightly. "This was given to me by someone who never made it back." It hit like a closed door between them. Polite, final. Carla froze. Words assembled in her throat but refused release. A passenger, a row ahead, paused, finger hovering over a tablet screen. Someone else turned, then turned away again. She cleared her throat. "Of course, sir. I just needed to address it. Thank you for your understanding." He gave no nod, no response. She turned away with a smile that barely held. Her heels clicked softly back toward the galley. Familiar rhythm, unfamiliar tension. She exhaled as the curtain slipped behind her. But the pressure didn't leave. If anything, it intensified. Because for the first time in a long time, she couldn't tell if it was his presence that shook the cabin or her own reaction to it. The plane hummed along, but the quiet wasn't peace. It was taut, like the air itself carried memory. Conversations hushed, screens glowed, forgotten. Something real had passed through, and everyone had felt it, if only for a second. Carla stood at the edge of the galley, arms crossed, back rigid, eyes locked on 2A. Robert Downey Jr. hadn't moved. Neither had the cross. He sat there like he wasn't just a passenger, but a reminder of something not easily named, of weight that can't be measured in pounds, of symbols that outgrow decorum. She straightened her uniform again, tried to settle the unease, but the truth was simple. It wasn't the cross that made her stare. It was what it made her remember. Her steps struck the carpet harder now, the kind of sound that tried to declare control before words arrived. She moved with more edge, as if confidence could be willed into existence by posture alone. Stopping at row 2A, she leaned down, not aggressive, but closer, voice quiet, tight. "Mr. Downey," she said, her tone clipped, "I've received a few glances. Some passengers seem unsettled." He turned to her slowly, gaze deliberate, like nothing he did was wasted. "Unsettled about what?" he asked. She hesitated. No policy in her training covered this exact situation. "About the visible display of ideology," she said, picking the most neutral words she could summon. "We usually ask that personal symbols be kept discreet." He let that settle between them, not filling the space, not softening it either. Then he said clearly, but quietly, "You're asking me to hide what's left of my son." The sentence didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed, sharp, final, honest. A woman across the aisle looked up. 2 rows back, a man stopped mid-scroll. Carla faltered. "Sir, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," he said gently. "You just didn't think I'd answer." She stood there, caught in her own script. He adjusted slightly, not to provoke, just to ground himself. "If someone wore a tree around their neck, or a stone, or their family crest, would you ask them to hide it too?" "That's not what this is about," she said too quickly. He paused, tilted his head. "Then what is it about?" She didn't reply, because it wasn't about rules. It was about assumptions, about the instant judgment she made when she saw a man in a worn leather jacket, eyes full of years, wearing something sacred too visibly. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, like someone done waiting for permission, "The problem isn't the cross, it's your eyes." And just like that, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Not a noise, a stillness. Passengers weren't just watching, they were feeling. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was about presence. About one man refusing to shrink his truth to make the room more comfortable. Outside, the plane cruised through a deepening sky. Inside, something had cracked open. The quiet changed. People sat a little straighter. Some avoided looking. Others glanced toward 2A, then away. Not scandalized. Aware of something real in a place curated to forget pain. Carla stood frozen in the galley, her hand resting on a service tablet she wasn't reading. She'd handled turbulence, delays, difficult passengers, but not this. Not a man who spoke little, yet made her feel the weight of everything she hadn't thought through. She looked down the aisle again. Robert Downey Jr. hadn't moved. He didn't have to. Stillness again, but this time louder. One hand rested near the crucifix. Not held, not flaunted. It simply existed there, like part of him, unchanging, unhidden. She walked back. No smile this time. No softened phrasing. Just the truth. "Sir," she said, more measured, "we try to keep the cabin neutral. That's all I'm trying to protect." He didn't answer right away, and when he did, his eyes didn't challenge. They understood. "Neutrality's fine," he said, "until it starts asking people to erase the parts of themselves that still hurt." She paused. "Some might feel offended," she replied, less certain now. "I'm not here to offend," he said. He looked down, brushing the cross lightly with his thumb. This was my son's. She stopped. He gave it to me before his last deployment, he continued. Told me to wear it if anything ever happened. He looked up. I buried him a month later. Silence flooded the space around them. Not awkward, sacred. Someone behind them coughed to cover the quiet. A seatbelt light blinked on. The plane dipped, not dramatically, just enough to remind everyone they were still in the air. Carla braced herself on a seat, but she already felt unsteady, even before the jolt. I didn't know, she said. I wasn't asking you to, he replied. The aircraft leveled again, but something in the cabin hadn't, because suddenly the discomfort wasn't the cross. It was the reminder that grief doesn't owe anyone silence, that presence isn't performance, and that asking someone to tuck away the last piece of what they lost says more about us than it ever will about them. 5 minutes later, the cockpit door clicked open with a quiet sigh. Captain Morales stepped into the cabin. Early 50s, olive-toned skin weathered by altitude, eyes that had seen more than skies. He didn't move fast. He didn't need to. His presence didn't rely on volume or posture. It just was. The kind of presence people instinctively trusted. Carla met him in the galley, arms folded tightly across her chest. Captain, we have a situation, she said, her voice firm. Passenger in 2A is refusing to comply with a request. He's wearing a visible religious symbol. I've asked twice. He won't tuck it in. Morales didn't respond right away. He looked down the aisle toward 2A. Any direct complaints? He asked. Carla hesitated. No, but there's tension. It's building. Passengers are watching. Morales turned to Nicole, the younger flight attendant beside them. Nicole looked uneasy but spoke. He hasn't been loud. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's just quiet. Morales nodded once, then walked. The cabin grew quieter, the kind of quiet that comes when people sense something important is about to happen. Phones angled subtly, heads turned just enough. This wasn't about protocol anymore. This was about something else. Morales reached 2A. Mr. Downey, he said evenly, I'm Captain Morales. I understand there's concern over your necklace. Downey looked up, calm and composed. She asked me to hide it. I said no. The captain nodded. May I ask why? Downey's eyes dropped briefly to the cross resting on his chest. Because hiding it would be a lie. He inhaled slowly. My son wore this before I did. Not for faith, for memory. He gave it to me the day before he died. A pause. Plane crash. Private jet. Engine failure. His eyes lifted, steady. You ever felt that silence? When everything mechanical stops and time tears in two? Morales didn't blink. He had. Downey continued, voice softer. I couldn't wear it for a long time. Every time I looked at it, it hurt. But one day I realized it wasn't broken. I was. He touched the cross. This reminded me I was still here. The silence deepened. Not uncomfortable. Sacred. Carla stood nearby. Morales turned slightly toward her. Was he disrespectful? He asked. She said nothing. Did he threaten anyone? Raise his voice? Still no answer. Morales turned back to Downey. Thank you for sharing, he said. You have every right to wear it. Then he turned and walked away. Carla stood frozen, because the decision didn't just calm the cabin, it disrupted something in her. She walked back to the galley, posture composed, but vision blurred. One thought pulsed behind her calm exterior. It was never about the necklace. It was about the man still wearing it when others would have buried it with the dead. Behind the curtain, the engines hummed. Background noise for the weight pressing against her ribs. She braced herself against the galley counter. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once, twice, then again. She pulled it out. Notifications already exploding. Tags, mentions, comments. A video. Climbing views by the second. Her face, her voice, telling Robert Downey Jr. to hide his cross. She didn't play it. She didn't need to. The memory was clearer than any screen. The tone she'd used. The softness that wasn't genuine. The judgment in the phrase, we encourage discretion. But what twisted deepest wasn't embarrassment. It was memory. She'd seen a cross like that before. Not his, her father's. She was 12 the first time she tried to tear it from his neck. He'd come home late, again, smelling like bourbon and guilt, whispering apologies through clenched teeth. She'd screamed, "God doesn't live in that necklace." But he hadn't hit her. He hadn't yelled. He just knelt down, eyes tired, and said, "Maybe not, but he still listens when I wear it." She never wore anything spiritual after that. Not around her neck, not in her heart. She folded Faith up neatly, placed it somewhere far from where it could be broken. And now, all these years later, it returned in the silence of a man who looked nothing like her father, but carried the same quiet weight. She closed her eyes. The plane disappeared, and all she could hear was her father's voice. "I didn't wear it for years. It didn't hurt because it was broken." She swallowed. "It hurt because I was." She sat down on the narrow galley stool, hands trembling. One pressed against her chest like something underneath the uniform needed holding together. What had she become? A professional? A protector of rules? A curator of calm? But not a person? Not for a long time. And Downey, this man with pain in his eyes and a name engraved into a crucifix, hadn't accused her. He hadn't even raised his voice. He just held up a mirror. And for the first time in years, she had looked. Now she couldn't unsee it. The reflection still there, unflinching. A woman who'd buried her own grief by trying to erase it in others. And a necklace that reminded her some faiths don't need altars, just the courage to let them exist. The curtain to the galley slid open. Carla stepped back into the aisle, but this time she didn't move with purpose, or with protocol. Each step forward felt like shedding a layer, the routine, the training, the hardened self she'd built to survive. Passengers looked up as she passed, not with mockery, not even judgment, with curiosity, like something had shifted and they could feel it. Some had seen the video, others hadn't, but all of them knew this moment mattered. She reached seat 2M. Downey sat just as before, still, hands on his lap, cross unmoved, silence unbroken. She stood there a second, unsure, and then she knelt. Gasps echoed through the cabin, sharp, surprised but brief. Even astonishment seemed to soften itself here. Her knees touched carpet, and the flight for a moment seemed to hold its breath. "I was wrong," she said softly. Her voice cracked, but she didn't try to stop it. "I told myself I was protecting the cabin, keeping the peace, but I wasn't. I was protecting my discomfort and calling it duty." Her hands shook. One of them hovered near her chest, mirroring the gesture Downey had made earlier. "I forgot what it meant to see people, not manage them, not contain them, just see them." She looked up, her eyes full, but no tears fell yet. "When you spoke about your son, about carrying what hurts, I knew exactly what you meant." A pause. "I've been hiding my grief behind rules, hoping if I controlled everything, maybe pain wouldn't find me again." Downey studied her. No pride, no smugness, just that steady-rooted presence, like stone that had been weathered, not cracked. Then he stood, deliberate, gentle. He extended his hand. She took it, not to create a scene, not even as apology, just to be helped up, and maybe to share the weight. Once upright, she noticed what he held in his other hand, the crucifix. He held it out to her, not with ceremony, not with drama, just open. "I carried it long enough," he said quietly. "Maybe now it can remind you of something good, instead of something gone." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her hand closed around it like it had always belonged there. The cabin didn't move, didn't speak, not because it had to, but because no one wanted to disturb what had settled into the air. As Carla looked at the silver resting in her palm, the metal no longer felt cold. It pulsed faintly with warmth, and for the first time in years, something inside her whispered, "You're allowed to feel again." She didn't return to the galley, not right away. She stood beside Downey, the crucifix still in her hand, the chain wrapped loosely around her fingers. Its weight wasn't in metal, it was in meaning, the kind she'd avoided for too long, now resting where it needed to. Downey nodded once to the empty seat beside him. She hesitated, then sat. No words, no applause, just two people who'd shared something irreversible. The silence between them wasn't tension anymore. It was truth, the kind that settles when something long unspoken has finally been heard. She looked out the window. Night stretched across the sky. Below, clouds shimmered in soft moonlight. She didn't speak for a while. Then finally, "I used to believe in something." He didn't turn, just listened. "Before the uniform, before the script, I believed in people, in grace, in the idea that doing your job didn't mean losing your soul." Her voice was quiet, but underneath it, a life cracking open. "And then, I got really good at pretending I didn't care." She paused, the crucifix still warm in her palm. Downey shifted slightly, just enough to glance at her. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "It doesn't leave," he said. "We just stopped listening." Carla exhaled, a slow breath that felt like it had been trapped since the day her faith cracked and never healed. From a few seats back, Nicole watched, hands folded in her lap, her eyes glassy, not with judgment, but recognition. This wasn't a scene. It was something sacred. No flight announcement, no training manual. Just a moment that touched something deep and unnamed. Nearby, a young man lowered his phone. Across the aisle, a woman reached for her partner's hand. No one clapped. No one whispered. And somehow that made it feel holier. Carla looked again at the crucifix, then at Downey. "I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Just don't forget what it meant. To you. Or to him." She nodded, blinking quickly. The plane began its descent. The lights dimmed gently. Dawn bled into the edges of the sky outside. But inside, it had already arrived. No speeches had been made, no formal apologies. And yet, something inside the cabin had shifted, like grace had quietly passed down the aisle, brushing each row without needing to speak. This wasn't about policy, or jewelry, or decorum. It was about remembrance, that every passenger carries something sacred. Grief, memory, love. And when we force those things into silence, we don't make the world peaceful, just quieter. Carla rested the cross against her chest, not as a statement, as an act of honesty, and for the first time in years, she wasn't hiding. 2 weeks later, morning sunlight spilled through a modest apartment window, soft and imperfect. Dust floated in golden threads across the quiet. A mug of untouched coffee rested beside a phone mounted on a basic tripod. No makeup, no blazer, no uniform. Carla sat cross-legged on the floor. She stared into the lens for a long time before pressing record. No filters, no script, just her. "My name is Carla," she said after a pause, "and I'm the flight attendant from that video." Her voice was calm but raw. "I didn't come here to defend myself or to explain away what happened. I came to say what I couldn't say then." Her hand lifted to her chest. The crucifix lay against her skin, worn, unmistakable. "He gave me this. Robert Downey Jr. after I asked him to hide it during a flight we were on." She looked down for a second, then back into the camera. "I told myself I was doing my job. But the truth is, I was trying to protect something I didn't understand." A breath caught in her throat. "For years, I thought professionalism meant neutrality, that empathy was optional, that feelings had no place between rows 1 and 30. Her eyes flicked away for a heartbeat, then back, wet but clear. "But that man, he didn't shout. He didn't shame me. He just stayed still." Her voice trembled. "And in that stillness, he showed me everything I'd been too afraid to see." She held the crucifix up briefly. The chain shimmered in the soft light. "This used to scare me, not because of what it was, but because of what it reminded me I'd lost. Faith, grief, forgiveness, herself." She laid it gently back against her chest. "And I'm not wearing it now because I found religion. I wear it because I remembered what it means to be human." Another pause, this one full of meaning. "I'm not asking anyone to understand. I just wanted to tell the truth. Not the viral kind, the quiet kind, the kind that changes you when no one's watching." Her hand reached to end the recording, but just before she did, she looked into the lens one last time. "Thank you, Mr. Downey, for reminding me that some things aren't meant to be hidden, especially the parts we're most afraid of. Click. The screen went black. Carla didn't move. She sat there a long time. Phone off. Crucifix against her heart, not thinking about the flight, or the views, or the fallout. Just about the man who had lost his son, and still chose grace over grief. And in doing so, gave her back something she hadn't even realized she'd lost. Herself. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.